What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sit Down. As always, if you enjoy this video, please make sure you hit the like button and let me know what you think of today's very interesting discussion in the comment section below. If you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet, or you're living under a rock and seeing this video for the first time, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another sit down video. I'll also invite you, if you like all of our crime content here on the channel, make sure you check out my TikTok as well. The link is in the pinned comment of this video. We record and do plenty of different mafia, organized, and crime content over on TikTok. So make sure you check that out, as I said in the pinned comment. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get into another very interesting organized crime topic. And in May of 2010, the federal government would come across a mob summit, if you will. The meeting at a restaurant in Kenilworth, New Jersey called La Grilla would feature members of the Philadelphia and Gambino crime families. The story was to break bread, talk turkey, and relive the old days of the mafia. We would find out some pretty interesting information at that meeting. The problem for both families was the man that was there, Nicky Skins Stefanelli, the man that put the meeting together, was wired for sound. Today, we're going to take a look at that meetup as far as many others the Nicky Skins would wire up for. The story of the very interesting Nicky Skins Stefanelli. Next on the sit down, Nicholas Stefanelli was born in March of 1942 in New Jersey. He would grow up in and around Newark in the town of Belleville, just outside of Newark. Now, Nicky Skins, most of his early life is unknown. However, by his 20s and into his early 30s, Nicky Skins would quickly delve into criminality. And before bookmaking and legit businesses, Nicky Skins was a burglar. Now, alongside another individual, a person called Robert Bobby Cabert Basaccia, he and Basaccia Stefanelli would begin robbing homes. Now, in 1972, they would be arrested and ultimately convicted of multiple burglaries. Now, one of which can be seen here. According to this article, Nicky Skins Stefanelli, as well as Bobby Cabert, would be jammed up on the robbery of a home in Newark belonging to a person called Dom Bruno. Now, Basaccia, alongside Stefanelli and two other men, allegedly ran up in the home and robbed Dom Bruno. Now, it was said that Dom Bruno was ultimately a burglar as well. Now, for Nicky Skins, this would mean that he would have to go to prison. He would ultimately, according to this article, be sentenced to 10 to 12 years in prison. He would also be fined $5,000. Now, at the time, Stefanelli lived in Belleville, and in his early 30s had to find the fact that he was going to go to prison because of his caper. The thing was, though, he was impressing people in the mafia, and that's something that Nicky Skins would be investigated for in this probe as well, his ties to organized crime. Now, upon getting out of prison in the 80s, Nicky Skins started hanging around members of the New Jersey crew of the Lucchese crime family, most notably run by Anthony Tumac Asatoro. Now, if you know anything about the North Jersey crew of the Lucchese crime family, they are still around today. In fact, I did a video on a group called the Pernas. They are said to currently have some of the prevailing interests of the Lucchese's in New Jersey. But back in the 80s, Tumac Asatoro had a pretty large crew, which included people like Michael and Martin Teixeira, as well as the Pernas. Now, around that time, the New Jersey crew was kind of doing their own thing. They were going against and didn't want to follow orders given down by Anthony Casso and Vic Amuso. Now, according to Little Al Diarco, he would say that at one point, and we would know this from history, that multiple members of the New Jersey crew were scouted and possibly on the docket to be killed. Now, Little Al would say that one of the people included in that was Nicholas Stefanelli. He was said to be an associate of that crew. Now, in and around that time, once he is connected to the Lucchese crew, Nicky Skins becomes close to a member of the Gambino crime family, someone that we recently talked about here. He becomes indebted to Nicholas Carrazzo. We would know Carrazzo is a Gambino powerhouse. And Stefanelli becomes close to not only Carrazzo, but Lenny Di Maria. And by the early 90s, Nicholas Carrazzo is happy with Stefanelli. He's a associate of the Gambino crew, and Carrazzo pushes for Stefanelli essentially to be released from the Lucchese crime family and is proposed for membership in the Gambino crime family. In and around the 90s, Carrazzo would propose that Stefanelli be made. And due to the fact that Stefanelli was close at one point with Robert Bobby Cabert Basaccia, Stefanelli becomes a made member of the Gambino crime family. He's initially placed in the crew of Nicky Carrazzo. Carrazzo, though, in the mid 90s would go to prison, and Stefanelli would be put into the crew of James Jimmy Boy Della Rata. Now, Della Rata is a very low key Gambino capo that not many people are even aware of. Della Rata was particularly strong, at least in his early years, in hijacking, which he would actually serve prison time for down the road. Della Rata would then become close to Local 23, which is the Mason Tenders Union. He was involved with that group as well. Very low-key guy in Brooklyn. Didn't make a lot of headlines. Didn't really go to prison until late in his life. And Stefanelli was kicking up once he became a made member to Jimmy Della Rata. Now, Stefanelli was a fascinating guy. He had been around for a long time, paid his dues, was a pretty good earner. It was said that he was also pretty low key. A lot of people kind of knew Nicky Skins to be just a guy that, made money, didn't make headlines, did what he had to do in New Jersey. And if he had to do things that involved violence, he would, though it wasn't something that he was known for. Now, not only was Nicky Skins involved with bookmaking and loan sharking, but he also had this laundromat at a Belleville strip mall called Plaza Laundromat. And it was said that Nicky Skins on a regular basis would be there. He would operate the thriving cash business and was known to be a pretty normal guy. Now, certain people that knew Nicky Skins would say, quote, he wasn't someone that really acted like a wise guy. He was a local businessman who was kind of like particular of the parking lot. It was said that he designated certain parking spots for customers and that he was there almost every day making sure that people didn't use the parking spots that were set aside for the laundromat when they were going to use other stores. According to a local person in the area, he said he did know of Stefanelli's reputed mob ties, but that he was a, quote, old school guy who believed in going to church and raising your kids the right way and was always a gentleman. The person would also remark that, quote, he was a deadly serious about a lot of old school values. I never heard him utter a foul word around women. And I also heard him tell people to watch their mouth when they violated that rule. Now, it was also said that Stefanelli was, quote, a legitimate tough guy who spent a lot of time in jail and that he believed fervently in the most basic old school rules, including not being an informant. So Stefanelli was just kind of an old school guy, a typical kind of get off my lawn kind of guy, old school guy who you don't talk stupid around women, you act like a human being, and you don't park in his parking spots. Kind of like that get off my lawn type of guy. But Stefanelli earned money. He was an earner. And the good thing about the laundromat is that's a cash business, right? You can launder money through it. And it was a pretty good place to have. The problem, though, that Stefanelli had is like a lot of people in the mafia, bookmaking and laundromats just wasn't enough. And Stefanelli would go to prison 2 different times for selling not only cocaine, but heroin. And that was the problem with Stefanelli. And he would even remark at one point that people in the mafia were too greedy. And it's a shame that he didn't take his own advice because selling drugs ultimately was the downfall of Nicholas Stefanelli. And this would set aside a 3-year period that were really fascinating, quite frankly, in terms of Nicky Skins. He would do things that very few mobsters have done. He would go back on something that he ultimately decided to do. But the plight of Nicky Skins would happen in and around 2009. His obsession with making more money got the best of him. In late 2009, Nicky Skins Stefanelli, alongside his son, Nicholas Stefanelli Jr., were jammed up in a drug beef. They were fingered by an individual that was selling drugs that was wired for sound, and he gave them up. Nicky Skins is arrested, and the feds say to him basically, look, you're going to jail, but you're not just going to jail too. Your son's going away as well. And Nicky Skins, family man, says, hold on. I don't want my kid to go to jail. I don't want him involved with this. What do you want me to do? Nicky Skins decides to cooperate. But the feds realize he is a treasure trove. He knows all sorts of people, Gambino people, Lucchese people, Philadelphia people, New England people. And they say, okay, we're going to wire you up. And this would uncover some truly fascinating meetups and dinners and lunches and all sorts of things. So Stefanelli is, in a way, we kind of take this storyline from The Sopranos. If you remember, Big Pussy in season 1 and 2 is caught selling heroin, and they wire him for sound. And that's exactly what happened to Nicky Skins. I want to go through some of the different things that Nicky Skins would ultimately wire himself up for and ultimately present. In May of 2010, he would take part in assembling a meeting that would happen at this restaurant in Kenilworth, New Jersey, a place called La Griglia. Now, at that meeting, it was essentially a power lunch involving members of the Gambino and Philadelphia crime families. Now, according to the defense attorneys of most of the people I'm about to name, they would say that this was really just a meeting of old friends, and they were talking turkey and having a bunch of good food and just reliving the old days. But what we would learn in this wired up conversation is they were talking about a lot of things. Now, I want to talk about who was at the meeting, and then we'll get into some of the remarks that were made during the meeting. Now, the meeting would consist, obviously, of Nicky Skins, who kind of set the meeting all up. Also at the meeting were some pretty big people, including Gambino heavyweight John Gambino, Lorenzo Menino, who today is regarded as one of the bosses of the Gambino crime family, Alphonse Trucchio, Michael Rockefort, Nicky Skins Stefanelli, as well as representatives from the Philadelphia crime family, including the acting boss at the time, Joe Legambi, Big Lou Fazzini, Joe Scoops Licata, and Philadelphia heavyweight and number 2 to Joe Legambi, Anthony Stano. Now, at the meeting, all sorts of things were discussed. They talked about things not involving the mafia, but they also kind of started out the meeting with kind of reliving yesteryear. At one point, members of the Philadelphia crime family, including Big Lou Fazzini and Joe Licata, talked about the old days. According to Licata, he would say, quote, "We still got to stay with the old rules." John Gambino would respond with, quote, "It's the only way to survive." Now, Lou Fazzini, who was Scoops Licata's top associate, would say, quote, "It's not about money." Alphonse Trucchio would respond, quote, "It's about brotherhood." Fazzini would respond, "That's the problem." Now, Stefanelli would respond with a very interesting message. He would say, quote, "It's all about effing greed." Now, keep in mind, that's rich coming from Stefanelli due to the fact that his greed led him to the sad denouement that he was in. His greed in wanting to sell drugs has basically got him to the point where he has flipped and is wearing a wire against his mob brethren. Now, there were also some funny things that were picked up on the conversation as well. At one point, Joe Scoops Licata was a capo, and he had a problem with an individual in his crew, an old school guy called Vincent Beeps Centorino. He would say about Centorino, quote, "I can't make 3 fucking cents with this guy," as the rest of the guys laughed. Licata would then say, quote, "We'll run a benefit for him." Now, in the same conversation, Joe Legambi would make a comment about things involving Santorino, that they essentially had him in a state where he was selling little cakes out of his car to make ends meet. Santorino was a, you know, old wise guy who was just struggling to make money. Now, also in the conversation, they would discuss mob murders, which is quite interesting. At one point, Joe Scoops Licata would laugh about the fact about the recent murder about 10 years previous of Johnny Gong's Casasanto. At one point, Legambi would joke about the murder of Johnny Gongs and made a passing reference to Fox 29 reporter Dave Schratweiser, which unfortunately we couldn't make out in the recording. Now, at one point, Licata would say, quote, "At least we finally got to get him." So that would make the case that someone in Philadelphia got to Johnny Gongs. Now, I'm going to do a video in about a month around the time that Johnny Gongs was killed. He was killed in November of 2023. So in a couple of weeks, we'll do a video on Johnny Gongs. A lot of people will tell you that the reason Johnny Gongs was killed in November of 2003 was due to the fact that he made multiple comments and was involved with women that were connected with members of the mafia. I don't believe that's what happened. If you look into the past of Johnny Gongs, he has had certain run-ins with Joe Legambi and Joe Legambi's family. In fact, at one point, it's alleged that Johnny Gongs shot up the home of Joe Legambi's brother, Philip Legambi, narrowly missing Philip Legambi's son. So there's a couple of reasons why I believe Johnny Gongs was killed, but the main reason to me is that he did that. Now, in this meeting, they joke about the death of Johnny Gongs. They also talk about other associates of the Philadelphia family, and everyone kind of remarks about things. In the end, the meeting at La Griglia would last about 5 hours. The total for the bill would come out to $902, and it would be paid in cash. Now, that wasn't the only thing that the federal government would get from Nicky Skins' wired up body. They would also get meetings involving members of other families. And it wasn't just Philly that Skins would target. At one point in 2011, Nicky Skins Stefanelli would meet at one point with Anthony D'Annunzio of the New England crime family. D'Annunzio was essentially the acting boss after his brother, Carmine the Cheeseman D'Annunzio, would be arrested by the federal government. Now, according to the FBI, D'Annunzio would meet with Stefanelli at a restaurant in Malden, Massachusetts. D'Annunzio would allegedly discuss the extortion of strip clubs in Rhode Island, indicating that it's, quote, still going. Now, at one point in a different meeting in 2010 with a senior Gambino family member, which we would find out would be Stefanelli, D'Annunzio would allegedly discuss leadership styles and that, quote, "As soon as I took over, I changed everything. One guy. What if nobody wants to listen to you?" they said. D'Annunzio would respond, "Then I said you're fucking shelved. What if they don't want to get shelved?" D'Annunzio would respond, "Well, then you and I get to watch you die in the fucking ground. I'll bury you right in the fucking ground, put all the dirt, you're alive. They stay there. I'll stay there fucking 10 hours until you're dead, and I'll dig you back up and make sure you're dead." Now, these recordings were quite destructive to Anthony D'Annunzio because he would ultimately be arrested in 2012 and sent to prison. Now, as usual, we know the federal government hates Joey Merlino. They would then send Nicky Stefanelli down to Florida to try to get Joey Merlino to talk on camera. Now, the two would meet at a Dunkin' Donuts in Boca Raton, Florida. Now, Merlino would say in 2013 that he met Stefanelli through a lawyer in New Jersey. Now, it's interesting because Merlino would say in an interview in 2013, quote, "The Fed sent him down here to set me up. I told him I'm legit. I don't want nothing to do with any of that stuff. What else could I say?" He would then say that he had hoped that Stefanelli would be electrocuted by both wires. So, look, Say what you want about Joey Merlino. He's a smart guy. He's always aware. He doesn't talk stupid on wiretaps. He's always got his antennas up, if you will. And that is no pun intended. But he does. He's a smart guy. He doesn't talk with people. He kind of wondered as to why Stefanelli was around. So as you can see, the feds are getting Stefanelli to jam up the nunzio in New England. They're getting him to set up meetings at restaurants where big people are going to. And they had thought down the road that Stefanelli was going to be a treasure trove. He could sit on the stand and point that person out and that person out and that person out. But by 2012, Nicky Skins had a plan. He had gotten cold feet and didn't want to testify against the mafia. The problem was the damage had already been done because he had recorded them. They were never going to forgive him, and he knew that. However, like I said, Nicky had a plan. Now, in and around February 24th, 2012, days before that date, it was said that Nicky Skins Stefanelli went to a local funeral home in New Jersey and paid for his funeral in cash. We know that older folks or people that are in their, let's say, 60s and beyond will prepay for their funerals. That way, in the case that it does happen, their families don't got to deal with that burden. Stefanelli would pay for his funeral. And on February 24th, 2012, he would walk into this video poker machine distribution company called Phoenix Amusement Company in Bloomfield, New Jersey. He would walk in and shoot the owner, a person called Joe Rossi, twice and walk out. The question was, why did Nicky Skins do this? Well, the problem was Joe Rossi was an informant, and Stefanelli got back Joe Rossi. Back in 2009, it was Joe Rossi that told the government about Nicky Skins and his son and their drug distribution network. Stefanelli believed Rossi was the reason for all of his heartache, and he was. The question was, where was the feds, and how did Nicky Skins walk in and kill a witness? Your guess is as good as mine. Nicky Skins, after the murder, would subsequently drive to this hotel, a Renaissance hotel in the Meadowlands in Rutherford, New Jersey. 2 days later, Nicky Skins would be found sprawled out on a bed in a hotel room. His death was marked a drug overdose, and essentially he whacked himself. Nicky Skins did not want to testify, and he felt that this was his way out. Did he beat the government? Kind of. And the government's cases would essentially fall apart. Joe Gambino would face a trial in mid 2015, 2014. He would beat the rap in that case. Most of the cases, they didn't have Stefanelli to testify. One of the guilty pleas, though, they would get was on James Jimmy Boy Delarada, the old capo of Stefanelli. He would get caught up in a cigarette smuggling distribution case. So in the end, Stefanelli is one of the only people in the history of the mafia to off himself. He didn't want to do time, but he also didn't want to betray the mafia and testify against them. The problem was the damage was done. He wore a wire for almost 3 years. And what we would find is really just some really interesting conversation. Now, interestingly enough, in 2014, Nicholas Stefanelli Jr. would be found dead at a home in Newark, New Jersey. He died the same way his father did, an overdose. Did they plan this? Is it something that they both just decided to do? It's interesting that both son and father died the same way. At the time of his death, Nicky Skins was 69 years old. My opinion is Nicky Skins is really one of the more interesting people connected to the mafia over the last 10 years. His story doesn't get much in the way of publication. And I know certain people have talked about him a little bit, but most people don't even know he actually existed. He's a guy who cooperated, but like many, got cold feet. He died peacefully in the end. That's the show for this week. We'll see you next week here on the Sit Down.